Hello and welcome to the Top 3 Channel. Top 3 Channel is brought to you by hopelify.org to inspire you to become the very best that you are designed to be. A few simple keys, mastered and consistently applied, are all you need to excel in each area of life. Hit the subscribe button to receive more Top 3 videos. Enjoy!
The biggest myth about vulnerability is that it's weakness. I think a lot of people were raised to believe that. It was modeled, I think, certainly in our culture. We see that a lot, that to be vulnerable, to be open, to be exposed is to be weak. And the truth is, what I found in my research is that vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, I would argue that it's our greatest measure of courage. When we went out and asked people, what is vulnerability? We heard things like, vulnerability is the first date after my divorce. Vulnerability is starting my own company. Vulnerability is taking responsibility for something that went wrong at work. Vulnerability is sitting with my wife who has stage 3 breast cancer and making plans for our young kids. Vulnerability is taking my business public. The definition I use in my work of vulnerability is simply uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is about the willingness to show up and to be seen even when there are no guarantees. And it's interesting to me, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I gave a talk, it's probably a couple of years now, and it was being translated by people doing American Sign Language, and they came up before the talk started and they said, are there any words that you're going to use a lot in your talk that we should know about that or might be different? And I said, well, I use the word vulnerability a lot. And there were two of them, and they kind of looked at each other and they said, oh, we do this for vulnerability. And I said, what does that mean? They said, it means weak in the knees. And I'm like, wow, that's not how I talk about vulnerability. And she said, well, there's only one other sign for vulnerability. And I said, what is it? And she said, and I said, oh, that's what I'm talking about. And so to me, vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. It's pretty powerful when I have 13,000 pieces of data collected over 12 years that I cannot find a single incident or story of courage that was not completely underpinned by vulnerability. I think the problem arises that there's so many little paradoxes with vulnerability, and one of them is that vulnerability is courage in you, but weakness in me. When I meet you, it's the first thing I look for in you, but it's the last thing I want to show you in me. And so I think to really put ourselves out there, knowing that if we do that enough, we're going to fail, I just don't think it gets more courageous than that. I'm going to tell you the story of how I get to the best definition of boundaries from a creative.
Okay.
Kelly Ray Roberts,
okay.
Artist, Portland. She's an artist who self-trained. She was an oncological social worker, like being a social worker in oncology, hard work. Yeah. She taught herself to paint. Now she has a thriving, huge business. And she was teaching art classes, and people were copying her art and selling it. And selling it on Etsy and selling it at different places. And one day she wrote a blog post, and it was about boundaries. And she said, let me tell you what's okay and what's not okay. And she made a list of everything that was okay. It's okay if you copy my art and hang it in your house. It's okay if you download one of my paintings and use it as a little sticker on your website as long as it's attributed. It's okay if you do this. It's okay if in good spirit you do this and this. It is not okay if you do the following 5 things.
I love it.
And it was the clearest example. And I called her and I'm like, you just pulled some social work magic bullshit on here. And she goes, yes, it would be so helpful if creatives were all social workers because we're trained on here's what's okay and what's not okay. You can come to my party, love to have you. You can't get shit-faced.
Yeah.
And that's a hard conversation. So I think one of the reasons why, or for creatives, the biggest thing I run into, and I work with creatives all the time and interviewed them just almost exclusively for Rising Strong, is people are afraid to put value on their work.
So true.
People are afraid to charge for it. People are afraid to, hey, look, I know you're a really good photographer. Can you come and shoot this wedding?
For
nothing.
For $0.
Yeah, for just like a free quiche and, whatever. You're serving. No, because do you know how stressful it is when do you know what happens when you get to a wedding and things don't go well?
I've never shot a wedding in my life because the concept of the mother of the bride is way more frightening to me than Google head of advertising hanging out with you. It's like for the people who do that's a stressful line of work for sure.
Right, and so the answer is I'd love to shoot the wedding. This is my fee for doing that.
Yeah.
Oh man, come on. I'd really love to, but because if you don't put value on your work, no one else will. I'm going to start with 2 questions that I really want you to think about. And the 2 questions are, what should I be afraid of today? And who's to blame? What should scare me and whose fault is it? To me, these are the most profoundly dangerous questions that we center our lives around. And what they are indicators, to me, what they're indicators of is a culture of scarcity, a culture of not enough. And when you think about any milieu in your life, think about education. What are we supposed to be afraid of and who's to blame? Politics, the economy, social issues. I guarantee you if you turn on the news or opened a paper today, the focus would be, here's why you should be afraid and here's whose fault it is. And what's interesting to me about that is it's not just at a cultural level or a community level. That stuff happens in my house every week. Every week with my husband, I talk to him about what should be, why we should be fearful and whose fault it is. Mostly it's his. But if something doesn't go well at my daughter's school, then I'm like, oh my God, this is going to have huge implications for our university. And we should be terrified right now that she's not getting cursive. I know she's 4, but this is still relevant. It's indicative of scarcity. So let's talk about what scarcity culture is and what it looks like. Scarcity culture, I think, is best understood with a simple question of never enough. And you can fill in the blanks. Never good enough, safe enough, certain enough, perfect enough, relevant enough. And perhaps I think one of the most dangerous and insidious messages today is never extraordinary enough. Somehow, in the world we live in today, an ordinary life has become synonymous with a meaningless life. And it has huge, and I've watched it happen not only as a researcher, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I sit across from people and look in their eyes and I have a good sense of what's going on in their lives. But as a university professor who's been teaching for the last 17 years, it's been very clear to me that extraordinary means relevant. And the top one is the big one for all of us personally, never good enough. Which is shame, which we all have on occasion, that sense that we're not smart enough, good enough, perfect enough, loved enough, promoted enough. We're not enough. So what we do in response to scarcity culture, I think all of us every day, is this. We wake up in the morning and we armor up. And we put it on and we say, I'm going to go out in the world. I'm basically just going to kick some ass. I'm not going to let anyone see who I am. And in doing so, I can protect myself against the things that hurt the most. Judgment, criticism, fear, blame, ridicule. I'm going to armor up and I'm going to be safe. And we rationalize and we convince ourselves that this armor is really smart. And we use a lot of different things to armor too. Perfectionism, intellectualizing. But if you get really, really clear about what we're doing every morning when we wake up and decide to armor, it's this simple. This is what we're protecting. We're protecting being hurt for a very simple reason that no one really wants to talk about, which is this. Love, belonging, irreducible needs of men, women, and children. In the absence of love and belonging, there is always suffering. And so what we believe is that we can protect our sense of being lovable and being acceptable and being worth connection with armor. Here's the very worst news from my research. The news that above all other I did not want to hear is simply this. And I don't even want to say it to you because I think it's mean to say it. But it's so true. And it's simply our capacity for wholeheartedness can never be greater than our willingness to be brokenhearted, which is a terrible thing, but a truthful thing. That we can only love and be loved as much as we are willing to have our heart broken. And so when we move through the world like this, and with our partners, with our children, with our friends, in classrooms, with the people who work for us, with the people we work for, there are tremendous casualties.
Thank you for watching today's Top 3 video. This channel is brought to you by hopelify.org to inspire you to become the very best that you are designed to be. Remember, a few simple keys, mastered and consistently applied, are often all we need to excel in each area of life. You can help make this channel even better in 3 simple ways. 1. Subscribe to receive more Top 3 videos. 2. Leave a comment below to let me know what resonates with you from today's Top 3 video. Or 3. Suggest a topic for a Top 3 video that you will like for us to feature on this channel. Visit hopelify.org to post your own inspirational content.